In this module, I will be taking up the questions that many of you are mistaking in your marrow GTs. So let us see what questions these are. So this is from your GT2. An 11-year-old girl presents with nasal obstruction, headaches and sleep disturbances due to snoring. Examination reveals a deviated nasal septum with prominent C-shaped deformity on the left side. Decision is made to proceed with a corrective procedure using an incision as shown below. What is the type of incision used? Okay, so here let us see the incision. Before that, just with the history, can you get an idea of what surgery is being done here? It is a child, 11 years girl, who has DNS, and for the DNS, a corrective surgery is being done. Yes, so corrective surgery of the septum can be what? Yes, it can be either a septoplasty or a SMR. Now, let me ask you, by the history, just by the history, can you get an idea about whether it is septoplasty or an SMR being done without seeing the picture at all? Yes, so it is a 11-year-old child. Do we ever do septal surgeries usually in children less than 17 years? Because here we have the secondary centers of ossification, which if get damaged will lead to additional deformity. So why are we operating in this child? Because this child has sleep disturbances, nasal obstruction, which is leading to sleep disturbances also. So which means that if at all we have to go for some surgery before 17 years, which one will you prefer? Septoplasty or SMR? Which is more conservative? Septoplasty. Complications are higher following SMR. Yes, so with the history, you just told me that you would like to go for a septoplasty. Now let us see that the incision is matching with what we have thought or not. Yes, so what we are seeing here is, yes, the septum where we are seeing, yes, see carefully, I will mark something. This, what is this? Yes, this is the lowermost part of the septum, that is the columnar septum. Above that is the membranous septum, and here we are seeing the septum proper. The septum proper is known as the septal cartilage or the quadrangular cartilage. Now, in septoplasty as well as in SMR, why is there a difference in the incision? In septoplasty, what we are doing is we give an incision at the lower border of the septal cartilage. We raise the mucosal and the perichondrial flap on one side and we remove only what part is deviated. Only that limited part. It's a very conservative surgery. Yes, we preserve everything that is good. That is what is septoplasty. Whereas in SMR, what we do is we leave behind a L-shaped strut of the cartilage. Yes, so superiorly and inferiorly, this part we leave behind. So when we anyway have to leave behind this lower segment, what we do is the incision that we give is 1 centimeter above the lower border of the septal cartilage. So after we have given this incision inferiorly and this incision superiorly, we remove this part. This is what is SMR. Yes or no? So now tell me the incision. Now let me rub this. Where is the incision? Yes, it is at the caudal border of the septal cartilage. So this is for septoplasty. So what is the name of this incision? Lynch incision, Killian's incision, Freer's incision, Weber-Ferguson incision. This is, yes, Freer's incision. I asked you to remember that in septoplasty we are freeing the septum of its deviations, which is Freer's incision. Whereas in SMR, we are killing the septum. We are removing most of it. So that is Killian's incision. Remember it like that. Yes. So what is the answer here? This is Freer's incision. Yes. If the incision was marked here on the quadrangular cartilage, 1 centimeter above it or little above the lower border, then that would be the Killian's incision. What is Lynch incision and what is Weber-Ferguson? Yes, so what is this incision that you are seeing? Yes, this is the Weber-Ferguson incision done for maxillectomy. And what is this incision? Yes, this is the Lynch incision, usually done for ligation of the anterior ethmoidal artery. A patient who presents with difficulty hearing and vertigo only on loud sounds. He was subjected to vestibular evoked myogenic potential test, which shows reduced threshold. What is the most likely diagnosis? Okay, so I think that you are mistaking this. This is a question of your grand test 3. You're mistaking this because you've forgotten what is VAMP. Now, let us suppose that we've forgotten what is VAMP. Still, can we come to the diagnosis with what we know? Let us see that. Yes. So, here we have a patient who has difficulty in hearing and vertigo only on loud sound. What is vertigo only on loud sound known as? Yes, that is known as Tullio's phenomena. Okay. So, can it be acoustic neuroma? Acoustic neuroma, can there be hearing loss? Can there be Tullio's? Tell me, can there be hearing loss? Yes, there can be hearing loss. Can there be vertigo on loud sounds? In acoustic neuroma, what is the presenting feature? It is any elderly with unilateral sensorineural hearing loss. Is there any vertigo at all in acoustic neuroma? No. No. Third window trauma. Okay, let us come to this later. Labyrinthitis. Tell me, can this be labyrinthitis? In labyrinthitis, is there hearing loss? Yes, there is hearing loss, sensorineural hearing loss. And is the Tullio's phenomena in labyrinthitis? How is the vertigo? Is the vertigo in labyrinthitis only on loud sound? Labyrinthitis, inflammation of the inner ear of the labyrinth. So, inflammation, if it happens anywhere, will be continuous. So, yes, the vertigo here will be continuous for a few days, 3 days, 1 week, 2 weeks. So, no, not vertigo only on loud sound. This also cannot be the answer. Vestibular neuritis. Now, vestibular neuritis, you will tell me, can this patient have hearing loss? Vestibular neuritis is inflammation of only the vestibular nerve. Yes, will this patient have hearing loss? No, no hearing loss. And if at all vertigo, what will be the type of vertigo? Vestibular neuritis, again, it is an inflammation of the vestibular nerve. So, inflammation, the vertigo will be continuous. So, no Tullio's phenomena. So, by the history also, even if we do not know what is VAM, we have come to the diagnosis that this is third window syndrome. Now, let us see a third window. Can it lead to hearing loss and vertigo and loud sounds? Yes or no? Yes. So, in third window, what happens? There is an abnormal opening. Where is the opening? The opening is at the level of the base of skull, which overlies the superior semicircular canal. So, what happens because of this opening in the bone, in the base of skull, the bone conduction sounds are excessively entering into the inner ear and sensed by the inner ear. So, the bone conduction sounds increase. So, the patient is able to hear his footsteps, his movement of eyeball, there is autophony, yes. And what happens to the air conduction sounds? The air conduction sound, when they are entering into the inner ear, because of this abnormal opening, some of it is getting lost before it reaches the organ of Corti. So, the air conduction sounds go down. So, when the air conduction goes down, air conduction is a measure of conductive plus sensorineural, bone conduction is sensorineural pathway. So, when the air conduction goes down and the bone conduction is good, we think what is good? Sensorineural pathway is good. So, if the sensorineural pathway is good, where is the defect? Conductive hearing loss. So, these patients have conductive hearing loss. This is a very important point that is asked in your exam. In third window syndrome, we know that there is a third window at the roof of the superior semicircular canal. So, usually what is a normal thinking that patient will have sensorineural hearing loss because it is an inner ear pathology. But we just saw that the patient has a conductive hearing loss. He presents with conductive hearing loss. Yes, and what about vertigo? Will this patient have vertigo and when will this patient have vertigo? Yes, this patient will have vertigo whenever there is excessively loud sound or excessively pressure changes which are entering into the inner ear. What will happen is there is abnormal movement of the endolimb because of this abnormal communication. So, now this loud sounds as well as pressure changes will excessively stimulate the inner ear because of this abnormal movement of endolimb, because of the abnormal opening there, and that will lead to vertigo, but that will be only on loud sounds or on pressure changes. Vertigo on loud sounds is known as Tullio's phenomena, whereas vertigo on pressure changes is what is known as Henneberg sign. So, is that very clear? So, yes. So, now We know what is third window. Now, what is VEM? What is VEM? VEM is vestibular evoked myogenic potential, and it is a test for vestibulospinal or vestibulocolic reflex. Now, we know that the inner ear has two functions. It maintains our gaze, movement of the eye on our target, and that is by vestibulo-ocular reflex. And the second is it maintains our posture, our gait, and that is with the help of vestibulocolic reflex. In all of us, both vestibulospinal as well as vestibulocolic reflex is present normally. Can you give me one example of vestibulocolic reflex that happens in all of us normally? Yes, so whenever there is a very loud sound, what is our normal response? Like this. Yes, so what happened with loud sound? Yes, with loud sound, we suddenly had a relaxation of the sternocleidomastoid to maintain our posture. So how did this happen? Yes, so how this happens, just see here. So whenever there is a loud sound, now it enters the inner ear, but it enters and stimulates the inner ear not so much that it can lead to vertigo. That is not normal. With loud sounds, we have this, but we do not have vertigo with loud sounds. So the sound reaches the inner ear and it stimulates, the loud sound stimulates the saccule. Not enough that it can lead to vertigo, but just enough that it can lead to this reflex. Yes, so what happens from the saccule, from the inferior vestibular nerve, which goes to the vestibular nuclei, there the impulses are transmitted to the sternocleidomastoid muscle of the same side. Is that clear? Yes, so which means that yes, we do have a picture of this also. Yes, so what happens is that from the, whenever there is a very loud sound here, it reaches the saccule, and from the saccule it goes through the inferior vestibular nerve to the vestibular nuclei, and then through the vestibulospinal pathway it goes to the ipsilateral sternocleidomastoid, and there is a sudden relaxation of the sternocleidomastoid. So if a very loud sound is given to your ear or my ear and it is recorded, the relaxation of sternocleidomastoid, that is what is known as vestibular evoked myogenic potential. It is a potential of the muscle, but it is getting evoked by the vestibular stimulation, vestibular evoked myogenic potential. So in all of us whose inner ear are normal, if we give a loud sound, we are expected to have this reflex. Yes, so suppose we give a sound, how loud? Loud sound, 110 decibel sound. We are going to record this relaxation as in this, okay? We will get this response, right? Now, suppose in any patient, the inner ear is very hyperexcitable. Why has the inner ear become hyperexcitable? Yes, the loud sounds are excessively entering into the inner ear. Pressure changes are excessively entering into the inner ear, leading to hyperexcitability of the inner ear. So when can this happen? Yes, this can happen when there is a fistula on the medial wall. So the loud sound, which is now supposed to only mediate this reflex, is stimulating the inner ear so much that there is vertigo. Yes, or when the foot plate is in very close proximity to the utricle and saccule. So now also the loud sounds and the pressure changes will stimulate the saccule, the inner ear, so much that will not only lead to this reflex but vertigo. When can this happen? Abnormal proximity? Yes, that can happen when the utricle and saccule is dilated, as in Meniere's, or when the foot plate is hypermobile, which means that whenever there is dilatation of the utricle and saccule, as in Meniere's, or hypermobile foot plate of Stapes, as in congenital syphilis, or there is a fistula on the medial wall, or we just saw in superior semicircular canal dehiscence also. Whenever the loud sound and pressure changes reach the inner ear, they do not only lead to this reflex, this normal reflex, but they lead to hyperexcitability of the inner ear, leading to vertigo. So now when we do this test in these patients, what will happen? Even when we have given just a 80 decibel sound, you will see this reflex like this, which means the threshold has gone down, the threshold of the reflex has gone down, and the amplitude has increased. So this will tell you that the inner ear is getting stimulated excessively which means the patient has any of these pathologies. So, in other words, whenever we are suspecting Tullius phenomena or a Hennebert sign, whenever we are suspecting Meniere's, hypermobile foot plate, perilymphatic fistula or third window, it is then that we do this test. Is that very clear? Okay, so now these are the indications of Wemp test. Wemp test. Now here, Wemp that I just told you, where what we record in the sternocleidomastoid is known as cervical Wemp. Now just see here, the abnormal movement of the foot plate can also stimulate the utricle. And when it stimulates the utricle, from the utricle through the superior vestibular nerve, it goes to the vestibular nuclei and then it goes to the contralateral eye muscles for closing of the eye. You know, it is a reflex like this. Yes, so eyes also close at the same time whenever there is loud sound. So that is mediated by the ocular Wemp, and ocular Wemp is actually not a vestibulo-colic reflex, it is a vestibulo-ocular reflex. So this is what you need to know in Wemp. So now do you know that what is the full form of Wemp? Yes, we know that what is Wemp. Wemp is vestibulo-evoked myogenic potential. It is a test for which pathway? That has been asked in your exam. It is a test for vestibulospinal pathway. Now tell me, again has been asked that cervical Wemp test which vestibular nerve? Yes, it tests the inferior vestibular nerve. Yes or no? Cervical Wemp, that was a question of your exam. Cervical Wemp test inferior vestibular nerve. It is going from the saccule through inferior vestibular nerve. Whereas this one is not been asked, but yes, maybe it can be asked later on. That ocular Wemp is a test of which nerve? It is a test of superior vestibular nerve. So how does this help to know it is which nerve? Yes, if in any patient we are giving a loud sound and in spite of the loud sound we are not finding any response in the sternocleidomastoid, it means that the inferior vestibular nerve is affected. Similarly, if we are doing this test and we are not finding any response in the contralateral eye muscles, it means that superior vestibular nerve is affected. So this can help us to find out the nerve of involvement in acoustic neuroma or in vestibular neuritis. Is that very, very clear? Yes. So we know what is Wemp. We know it is a test for what? We know it is done in patients with what history? Yes, whenever you want to see that is the vestibular system getting excessively stimulated, and also it can help us to find out the nerve involvement in vestibular neuritis and acoustic neuroma. Right, a hyperactive response means reduced threshold and increased amplitude. Hypoactive response means no response at all, or the threshold is increased and the amplitude has gone down. Have you got that? Yes. So the next question, this is a question from your GT4. 48-year-old male presents with unilateral nasal obstruction, recurrent epistaxis and sinus pain over the last few months. His endoscopy findings are in the image below, and it seems to arise from the non-olfactory mucosa of the nasal cavity. Which of the following viruses is most commonly associated with the development of this nasal lesion? So what we can see in the picture is some polypoidal mass in the nose, and what is being asked is which virus is associated. Okay. So if we are seeing any nasal mass in this age group, this polypoidal mass, can polyps occur at this age? No, any polypoidal mass in the nose at this age in elderly, we have to rule out a tumor. And which is the tumor of the nose which has a viral etiology? Yes, the name itself has a papilloma. Inverted papilloma, Ringer's papilloma, Schneiderian cell papilloma. So, what is the virus associated? Herpes simplex, human papilloma virus, Epstein-Barr virus, CMV, cytomegalovirus. What is the answer? Yes, human papilloma virus. And now tell me which strains have been implicated in inverted papilloma? Yes, 6 and 11. Are these the high malignant potential or low malignant potential? These are low malignant potential. Now, this is a question from your GT5. Which procedure is combined with myotoplasty to look for middle ear pathologies? What is myotoplasty? What is asked is that you do myotoplasty along with which surgery of the ear to look for middle ear pathologies? Yes, myotoplasty is that you widen the external acoustic meatus by removing this cartilage, the conchal cartilage you have removed, and the external acoustic meatus, which was initially this much, you have widened it. You have made a big external acoustic meatus opening. So when will you do this? Canal wall up procedure, canal wall down procedure, simple mastectomy, myringoplasty. Tell me what's the answer. What is myringoplasty? Myringoplasty is repair of tympanic membrane. Okay, what is simple mastectomy? Canal wall down and canal wall up procedure. Okay, so now see this, okay. So here what we are seeing is the external auditory canal. This is the tympanic membrane. Further medially, when we go into the middle ear. Okay, now this here is the external auditory canal, posterior wall. This wall, let me mark it with red. This is the posterior wall of the external auditory canal. And behind the external auditory canal posterior wall, this is the mastoid. Now when we go further medially, we go into the deep part of the mastoid, and here the mastoid shares a common wall between the mastoid and the middle ear. Here we have the middle ear, right? Okay, so now let me rub all this. Okay, so now in simple mastectomy or cortical mastectomy, what do? Yes, we just drill the mastoid, complete mastoid we drill. We convert all the air, we open up all the mastoid air cells and we convert the complete mastoid into a single air-filled cavity. And we remove all the pus from the mastoid. This is done for simple mastectomy or cortical mastectomy is done for acute mastoiditis. Now, what is intact canal wall surgery? Yes, in intact canal wall surgery, again, we first drill the mastoid and we remove the disease from the mastoid. And then to remove the disease from the middle ear, we make a small opening on the posterior wall in this area. What is this area? Yes, the facial recess area in between the facial nerve descending part, medially, laterally the chorda tympani and superiorly the fossa incudis. And now we come into the middle ear and we remove the limited disease of the middle ear. That is what is intact canal wall surgery. Okay. Now, what is canal wall down surgery? Canal wall down surgery, what we are doing is we remove this common wall. I marked it in red, so I will mark it in red. This common wall between the external auditory canal and the mastoid, and also the common wall between the middle ear and the mastoid. We remove the complete separation between the external auditory canal and the mastoid and between the middle ear and the mastoid. So, we now convert the external auditory canal and the mastoid into a common cavity, the middle ear and the mastoid into a common cavity. Is that clear? So, when do we do this canal wall down surgery? Why do we need to remove this complete common wall? This complete common wall, why do we need to remove it? Yes, because the disease is very extensive. We know middle ear is so small. So, we want to have a good look of the middle ear and remove all the disease completely so that there is no recurrence. Is that clear? Okay, so now let us see this picture. Now, here the patient is lying down. Here this is the external auditory canal. When we go further medially, this is the middle ear and this is the common wall between the external auditory canal behind which we have the mastoid. Okay. So, now if you will tell me what surgery I am doing. Okay. Now, I have just drilled the mastoid and we can see it is now a single air-filled cavity, removed all the pus from that. What is that surgery? Simple mastectomy, cortical mastectomy done for acute mastoiditis. Okay. So, now I am changing my surgery. I have opened the mastoid, removed the disease from it, and now here in between the middle ear and the mastoid, we have the posterior wall of the middle ear, right there. There I will make a small opening in the facial recess area. Now, which is the surgery that I am doing? Yes, now I am doing the intact canal wall. Why is it known as intact canal wall? Because the posterior canal wall I am leaving intact. I am just making an opening there. I am not just removing all the posterior canal wall. That is what surgery? Intact canal wall. Okay. And now what I am doing is, I am just see carefully, okay. In this picture, you can see the posterior wall of the external auditory canal. Yes. Now see here. in this surgery, what I have done, this posterior wall which was present here, in between the external auditory canal and the mastoid. See the first picture, between the external auditory canal and the mastoid. Can you see this common wall? Yes, this wall, see in this picture, is gone now. The common wall between the middle ear and the mastoid, yes, this complete common wall, I have removed. So what have I done? I have converted the external auditory canal and the mastoid into a common cavity, the middle ear and the mastoid. All this is now one big cavity. Yes, so I have done a canal wall down surgery. Now, if I made such a big cavity posteriorly also, which means that here we had the external auditory canal, that was the middle ear, here we had the mastoid. I have made such a big external auditory canal now. The external auditory canal posterior wall is no more there. This is one big cavity, one big cavity. So, how will I inspect this cavity? Definitely in this cavity there will be collection of wax, of debris. How am I going to clean that? For that I will have to inspect that area and clean it. For that I will have to widen the meatus so that now when I see through the meatus, I will be able to see not only the external auditory canal and the middle ear, but also this big cavity that I have made behind. Is that clear? So now you will answer this question. Which procedure is combined with meatoplasty to look for middle ear pathologies? Canal wall up procedure, canal wall down procedure, simple mastodectomy, myringoplasty. It is done for canal wall down procedures. Which of the following frequencies does the Boyler's notch typically dip at? What is Boyler's notch? Yes, this is another name for acoustic dip. Acoustic dip. Yes, this noise-induced hearing loss was initially seen in people who were working in steam boilers. So there the machines, they make a lot of noise. So that is why it was earlier known as boiler's notch, but now it is known as acoustic dip. So now when we know it is known as acoustic dip, yes, we know it is a dip at 4000 hertz. Okay, so let us see the choices. 4000 hertz in both bone conduction and air conduction. 2000 hertz, no, it cannot be 2000 hertz. 4000 hertz in air conduction only. 2000 hertz in air conduction only. No, so it has to be 4000 and two choices are 4000. So now tell me what is the answer, A or C? This noise induced hearing loss, acoustic dip, is it a conductive hearing loss or is it a sensorineural hearing loss? It leads to sensorineural hearing loss. Noise induced hearing loss damages outer hair cells. So that is what hearing loss? Sensorineural hearing loss. Okay, in sensorineural hearing loss, yes, what will be affected? Only air conduction or both air conduction and bone conduction? Yes, air conduction is a measure of conductive plus sensorineural pathway. Bone conduction is a measure of only sensorineural pathway. So if the sensorineural pathway is defective, what will be affected? Only air conduction or both air conduction and bone conduction? Both air conduction and bone conduction. In fact, this is a audiogram that you must have seen so many number of times. Yes or no? Yes. So we see that there is a dip at 4000 hertz and there is no AB gap. No AB gap means sensorineural hearing loss. And also notice that always it is bilateral. Most of the time it is bilateral. Now if I show you this picture, what is this? Yes, this is the downsloping audiogram seen in high frequencies. Also what is there? There is no AB gap, means it is bilateral sensorineural hearing loss in high frequencies. And when you see this, there are three things that you think of: presbycusis, ototoxicity and noise induced hearing loss. Though the earliest change that you see in noise induced hearing loss is a dip at 4000 hertz. Yes or no? So now if I ask you that in all these conditions, presbycusis, ototoxicity, noise induced hearing loss, yes, is only the air conduction affected, or both air conduction and bone conduction is affected? Whenever sensorial pathway is affected, sensorial pathway is the common pathway for both air conduction and bone conduction. So both air conduction and bone conduction will be affected. Is that clear? So yes, the answer is A. So this is from GT5. The previous was also from GT5, I think. Yes, GT5. So, a young woman presenting with persistent ear discharge, deep-seated ear pain and diplopia is suspected to have apical petrositis. Which of the following X-ray views is preferred to evaluate this patient? So, this is a patient who is having what involvement? Yes, fifth nerve, sixth nerve, apical petrositis. Petrous apex is involved. So, what is the X-ray view? Waters view, Townes view, Cadwell's view, Hertz view. Yes, we know definitely Waters view is for maxillary sinuses, so that cannot be the answer for petrous bone. Cadwell view is for frontal sinuses, that also cannot be the answer. So we are stuck between Townes view and Hertz view. Yes, so this is a question, a little offset question. Why? Because yes, nowadays we do not do these X-rays for either the nose or the ear. Yes, we do CT scan. There is a tremendous difference between the clarity and what you can appreciate with a CT and with a X-ray. But still, if this has been asked, you should know. Yes, this has been probably given in your exam. Why? Because some time back in FMG exam, this was a question. Yes, so we need to know what is Hertz view, what is Townes view. What is Hertz view? It is a submental vertical view. So when you are passing the rays like this, the head is on the X-ray film, the beam is passing like this. What you are able to see is the sphenoid sinuses. So you are able to see the sphenoid sinuses. The Hertz view is the submental vertical view, and this is for sphenoid sinuses. Now what is Townes view? Now Townes view is when the occiput is on the X-ray detector, right? Now you tell me that in Waters view, what was touching the X-ray detector? It is a nose and chin position. Yes. So whenever we want to see the anterior part of the face, that faces the X-ray detector. In Cadwell's view, what faces the X-ray detector? It is a nose forehead position. Yes, and the beam will come from behind. So here again, when we want to view the anterior part of the face, what part of the face faces the X-ray detector? The anterior part. Now what we want to view is the petrous part of temporal bone. Where is that petrous part? Is it present anteriorly or is it present posteriorly? Yes, it is present posteriorly. So if we want to view the posterior part, which part should face the X-ray detector? Yes, the posterior part. So here the posterior part is facing the X-ray detector and the beam is going, yes, at an angle of 30 degrees posteriorly. So it is also known as skull AP, anteroposterior axial view. This is what is Townes view. So now the image that you get is like this. The X-ray film that you get is like this, and you can clearly make out that what you are seeing is the posterior part of the skull. So here what you are seeing, you know where the petrous part of the temporal bone is, right? So all this is the petrous part. Here you can see the mastoid hair cells. Now let me rub this. Can you make out? Yes. So yes, this is the mastoid hair cells that you are seeing, and this all is the part of the petrous bone. Yes, in the center we will see this is the foramen magnum. Let me show in this picture. Yes, in this picture, can you see this? This is the foramen magnum. Yes, so whenever we want to see the petrous part of the temporal bone, so we go for which view? We go for Townes view. So the answer here is Townes view. So here we have a question from your GT1. All the following clinical features are typically associated with an abscess in the pre-styloid compartment of parapharyngeal space, except. This seems to be quite easy. Why are you mistaking this? Okay, so except. So glossopharyngeal nerve palsy, prolapse of tonsil, trismus, swelling behind the angle of jaw. What will not be seen in pre-styloid compartment? What is the pre-styloid compartment? Where is the parapharyngeal space? We have seen that repeatedly. that this here, the parapharyngeal space is the lateral pharyngeal space present lateral to the pharyngeal wall. So, this here is the pharyngeal wall, lateral to that is the parapharyngeal space. See here again carefully, this is the oral cavity, here behind that will be the oropharynx, and lateral to the oropharynx, this is the muscular wall of the pharynx that we are seeing lateral to the muscular wall. This space is what is where the arrow is, that is the where this arrow is pointing, this is the parapharyngeal space. Now, the parapharyngeal space is a pyramidal space starting from the base of skull above going till the hyoid, right? It is like this, going up till the hyoid, and this space, as we can see, is divided by the styloid process into a space which lies anterior to the styloid process and the one that lies posterior to it. So, now let me rub this, which means that here we have the styloid process and the muscles attached to styloid. So, this here is the anterior compartment and this is the posterior compartment. Till here is it clear? Now, very important are the contents of the posterior compartment. In the anterior compartment, all we have is some vessels and nerves and mainly fat. Whereas in the posterior compartment, all the vessels and nerves that are going from the base of skull down, or the vessels that are going from the neck to the base of skull, they pass through the posterior compartment. What are these structures? These structures are the internal carotid artery, the IJV, the nerves are the 9th, 10th, 11th cranial, 11th, 12th, the last 4 cranial nerves, along with cervical sympathetic trunk, which means that if there is any of these nerve involvement, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, it is involvement of pre-styloid or post-styloid, anterior compartment or posterior compartment. Yes, the post-styloid or the posterior compartment. If there is Horner's syndrome, that is because of sympathetic trunk involvement, it will be involvement of posterior compartment. Involvement of internal carotid, IJV, all this will be posterior compartment. So, any of this given in your question will tell you it is posterior compartment involvement, right? Okay. So, also notice that I told you that we have the oral cavity here and behind that is the oropharynx. Yes. So, if there is any mass in the parapharyngeal space, yes. So, this here is the parapharyngeal space. Yes. So, it will first compactly fill the parapharyngeal space. So, when the parapharyngeal space has been completely filled, where is the parapharyngeal space? Here, this is my pharynx going down. Yes. This is my mandible. So, in between, this is the mandible, right? So, in between the pharynx and the mandible laterally, lateral to the lateral wall of the pharynx, here will be the parapharyngeal space. So, the mass in the parapharyngeal space or the abscess in the parapharyngeal space will first tightly compactly fill the parapharyngeal space. So, when the parapharyngeal space is compactly filled, the lower border of the parapharyngeal space is the hyoid. I will also see external bulge here. Whether it is anterior compartment or it is posterior compartment, I will see the external bulge here. We have the parotid here. So, be it anterior compartment or posterior compartment, in both the parotid bulge will also be seen. There will also be a bulge at the upper border of sternocleidomastoid or at the angle of jaw in both anterior and posterior compartment. So, if I am seeing this bulge, how do I differentiate that this is an anterior compartment or a posterior compartment? If there is any nerve involvement, that is posterior compartment. Also, remember that when there is any mass here, lateral to the pharyngeal wall, if it has compactly filled this space, now it will start applying pressure on the walls. So, it will apply pressure on the lateral wall of the oropharynx, and in the lateral wall of the oropharynx, we have the tonsils. Yes or no? So, now let us come to this cut section, which is a transverse cut section at the level of the tonsil. So, this here is the lateral wall of the pharynx. Lateral to the lateral wall of the pharynx, we have the parapharyngeal space. Yes, and the lateral boundary of the parapharyngeal space is the mandible along with the muscles attached to the mandible, the medial pterygoid and the masseter. Okay. Now, this space is divided by the styloid process into an anterior compartment and a posterior compartment. Now, if there is any mass or any abscess in the anterior compartment, yes, abscess is more common in the anterior compartment because in the anterior compartment we just have a lot of fat. Neurogenic tumors will be more common in posterior compartment, but be it a abscess or be it a tumor, if it pushes the lateral wall of the pharynx medially, if it pushes the lateral wall of the pharynx medially, if it is a mass occupying the anterior compartment, the tonsil will appear pushed medially. It will lead to prolapse of the tonsil medially. Whereas, if it is a posterior compartment tumor or mass, then the lateral pharyngeal wall will be pushed medially, but where? Behind the tonsil, behind the posterior pillar of the tonsil. Is that clear? Now, let me ask you that if there is anterior compartment abscess, where is the anterior compartment? This is the anterior compartment. Will the patient have trismus? What is trismus? Difficulty in opening the mouth, that is because of spasm of masticator muscle. So, do we have masticator muscles in relation to the anterior compartment? Yes, this is the superior constrictor muscle that forms the constrictor muscle, circular muscle of the lateral wall of the pharynx, and that attaches to the pterygomandibular raphe. That means it attaches to the pterygoid. It is in close relation to the pterygoid plate, and on the pterygoid plate are attached the medial pterygoid, lateral pterygoid, right? So, if there is any involvement of the anterior compartment, it can in turn lead to spasm of the masticator muscles leading to trismus. Is that very, very clear? So, now let me ask you that if there is a pre-styloid compartment, that is the anterior compartment abscess, where will you see the bulge inside the mouth? Yes, it will push the tonsil medially. And will you see the external bulge? Yes. In posterior compartment, yes. Will you see the bulge inside? Yes. But where? Behind the posterior pillar. And will you see the external bulge? Yes, we will see. Now, abscess is more common in anterior compartment. Trismus will be seen in anterior compartment. That is mainly because of spasm of medial pterygoid. Neurogenic tumors will be seen in posterior compartment. Horner syndrome in posterior compartment. Bulge behind the posterior pillar in posterior compartment. Parotid bulge in posterior compartment. Involvement of all these structures in posterior compartment. Yes, and so now, yes, answer this question for me. What will not be seen if there is abscess of pre-styloid compartment? Glossopharyngeal nerve palsy, will it be seen? No, it is in the posterior compartment. No. Prolapse of tonsil, yes, it will be seen. Trismus will be seen. Swelling behind the angle of jaw will be seen. So, what's the answer? Answer is A. The next question is from your GT4. 45-year-old diabetic male underwent the tooth extraction for caries tooth. 3 days later, he presents with fever, swelling on the right side of neck at the upper 1/3 of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Okay. He complains of difficulty in moving his jaw. What is that? Trismus. Okay. On examination, ipsilateral fascial tonsil is found to be displaced medially. What is the most probable diagnosis? Okay, so can it be Vincent's angina? What is Vincent's angina? It is necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis. It is an inflammation of the gingiva. Why will the tonsil be pushed medially and why will you see an external bulge at the angle of jaw? So, no. Retropharyngeal abscess. Retropharyngeal abscess, again there will be no trismus, no tonsil pushed medially, no external bulge here. In retropharyngeal abscess, the bulge is where? In the posterior pharyngeal wall on one side of midline. So, no. Parapharyngeal abscess, can this be parapharyngeal abscess? The tonsil pushed medially? Yes. Bulge at the angle of jaw? Yes. Trismus? Yes. So, yes, this can be. The last choice we have is quinsy. Can this be quinsy? What is quinsy? Quinsy is peritonsillar abscess. Peritonsillar abscess, where is the abscess? Yes, in peritonsillar abscess, there is abscess lateral to the capsule of tonsil. The capsule of tonsil is formed by the pharyngobasilar fascia. So, in between the capsule of tonsil and the superior constrictor muscle. In this space here, we have pus. This is the peritonsillar space. So, if there is pus here, what will it do? The pus here will push the tonsil medially. So, yes, this appearance will be seen of tonsil pushed medially. So, if the tonsil is pushed medially, can it be quinsy? Yes or no? Yes. Can it be parapharyngeal space abscess anterior compartment? Yes. So, how do we differentiate that? Yes, we just did that if there is any mass in the parapharyngeal space, yes, before it applies pressure on its walls to push the tonsil medially, it will first compactly fill this area. So, you will see external bulge also. External bulge also. So, yes, A tonsil is pushed medially in both peritonsillar abscess, that is quinsy, and parapharyngeal abscess anterior compartment trismus will be seen in both, because here we have the superior constrictor muscle in relation to the peritonsillar space, spasm of which, involvement of which can lead to spasm of the masticator muscles also. So it will be seen, tonsil will be seen pushed medially in both, trismus will be seen in both, bulge at the angle of jaw only in parapharyngeal. Okay, and also if I ask you, the lateral pharyngeal wall is pushed medially in, yes, the tonsil is pushed medially in parapharyngeal space abscess because of the lateral pharyngeal wall being pushed medially. So that will be also only in parapharyngeal space abscess. In peritonsillar abscess, the lateral pharyngeal wall is not pushed medially, only the tonsil is pushed medially. So here, what's the answer? C or D? Yes, it is C. Which clinical symptom will not be present in the patient whose X-ray is shown? Okay, so here we have to make the diagnosis by first seeing the X-ray, and we are getting two X-rays here. One is maybe a anteroposterior or a postero-antero view X-ray. It can be a Townes view or maybe anteroposterior view. And the second is a lateral view. What we are seeing here, the marked structure, let me mark it like this. Some bone, right? It's coming down from here like this. On the lateral view also we have some bony structure coming down like this. So what structure comes from here? This is the mastoid area. Yes. What is this? Yes, this is how the styloid process looks like. So this is a patient of enlarged styloid process. What is enlarged styloid process known as? Yes, Eagles syndrome, or yes, styalgia. Eagles syndrome is because of enlargement of the styloid process and calcification of stylohyoid ligament. Calcified stylohyoid ligament with enlarged styloid process. That is what is known as Eagles syndrome. Eagles. Now, I already showed you where the styloid process is. This here is the styloid process that divides the parapharyngeal space into anterior and a posterior compartment. Yes or no? We just did this in the previous question, which means that the styloid process is in close relation to some nerves. Which nerves? Yes, we have the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th cranial nerves, and very, very importantly, the 9th nerve. The 9th nerve is the main nerve supply of the oropharynx. This here is the oral cavity. Behind that will be the oropharynx. So the 9th nerve from here will go into the oropharynx, will give the nerve supply to the oropharynx, that is the tonsils, the base of tongue. Yes. So if the styloid process is enlarged and the stylohyoid membrane is calcified, it can impinge on the glossopharyngeal nerve very, very commonly. It can lead to difficulty, painful swallowing, because the oropharynx is involved there. The nerve supply of the oropharynx is involved. Yes, this can also lead to referred pain to the ear, glossopharyngeal nerve involvement. Yes, also the enlarged styloid process can impinge on the bed of the tonsil if we have seen this. Yes, the enlarged styloid process can impinge on the bed of the tonsil, and that can give a foreign body sensation, or when we palpate the tonsil there can be pain in that area. Yes, so also when the patient moves his head, on movement this enlarged styloid process can very easily impinge on the other nerves that are present around, that is the 10th, the 11th, the 12th nerve. 11th, the 12th nerve. Yes, so there can be symptoms because of involvement of these nerves also. Also here we have the internal carotid artery, there is jugular vein. So there can be features because of compression of internal carotid artery. There can be transient ischemic attacks. There can be features because of compression of jugular vein. So these are the features that can be present in enlarged styloid process. Yes, this is a very rare condition. And last styloid process is present only in 4% individuals, and out of these 4%, only 4 to 10% are symptomatic, most of them are not symptomatic. And in which people do we suspect that they might be having a styalgia or a Eagle syndrome? Yes, this enlargement of the styloid process and the calcification of the stylohyoid ligament usually follows injury. So this injury can happen following tonsillectomy. You are operating on the bed of the tonsil. So by chance you have gone little more deep and injured the stylohyoid ligament or the styloid process. Yes, or it can be because of when you are operating on the parapharyngeal space also you have done any trauma to this styloid process or the ligament. So now tell me, what is asked in the question is what will not be present in this patient. The choices: difficulty swallowing, facial pain, ear discharge, foreign body sensation. Not be present. Yes, why ear discharge has to be present? If we have to choose one, we will choose the ear discharge. Yes, the swallowing will be very painful. There will be difficulty in swallowing, facial pain because of impingement of all these nerves around the styloid process. Yes, so it can be there. Foreign body sensation in the throat can be there. So the answer here is C. This now is a question from your GT4. A 55-year-old male chronic smoker presents with persistent sore throat, difficulty in swallowing, and a feeling of fullness in the throat. His CT and biopsy confirmed squamous cell carcinoma of the base of tongue. Which of the marked areas contain lymph node levels that are first to be involved in this condition? So, in other words, what is being asked is that the base of tongue drains into which group of lymph nodes? Do we know that? Let me ask you, tonsil drains into which group of lymph nodes? Tonsil, what is a tonsillar node? Tonsillar node is the upper deep cervical, jugulodigastric lymph node. And tonsil is a part of oropharynx. Base of tongue is a part of oropharynx. The complete oropharynx drains into level 2, 3, 4. Yes. So tonsils, they mainly drain into upper deep cervical. Base of tongue also, if we talk about first, they will drain into upper deep cervical. So here in this picture, what we need to identify is which one is the upper deep cervical. Yes. So what are the lymph nodes? 1A is the submental, 1B is the submandibular. 2, 3, 4. They are along the sternocleidomastoid, upper 1/3, middle 1/3 and lower 1/3. The 2 is known as upper deep cervical, 3 is middle deep cervical, 4 is lower deep cervical. The upper deep cervical is also known as jugulodigastric. The middle deep cervical is also known as jugulo-omohyoid. Now, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Where is 5? 5 is the posterior group. And where is 6? 6 is the anterior group. So now if you have to mark for base of tongue, what will you mark? Yes, it will be the upper deep cervical, that is a jugulodigastric. Now let me rub this so that we can see what the upper deep cervical has been marked as. Yes, upper deep cervical has been marked as 1. So what is the answer here? This is 1. So the answer is 1. Now let me ask you, if it is asked pyriform fossa carcinoma instead of base of tongue, if it is asked pyriform fossa. So pyriform fossa, we know is a part of hypopharynx. Again, the hypopharynx drains into, this is known as lateral group. 2, 3, 4 is known as lateral group. Again, it drains into lateral group. If out of the hypopharynx specifically is asked pyriform fossa, then again the answer will be upper deep cervical. Now, if I ask you larynx drains into which lymph nodes? Mainly, yes, so larynx drains again into the lateral group, that is 2, 3, 4. In fact, has been asked that which lymph nodes will you remove for larynx? Yes, 2, 3, 4 and also the anterior group. Here we have the larynx, no? So, anterior group. Anterior group is known as Delphian lymph nodes. So that is also removed along with lateral group. Lateral group is 2, 3, 4. Out of which the supraglottis drains mainly into upper deep cervical and upper deep cervical, and the subglottis mainly into lower deep cervical. and this is 2 and this is 4. And glottis into glottis has literally no lymphatics. That is why it has got best prognosis. Yes. So those were the questions. I hope it was helpful.